Hi, my name is Grace Gao. Today is Friday, April 4th, 2025, and it is 11:05 Pacific Standard Time. I'm conducting this interview virtually from my home in Orange, California, and I'm here with Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock, and she is being interviewed from her home in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. We're meeting today for a project called Voices of Resilience, documenting the foremothers of Asian American feminist theologies, an oral history project in celebration of PANAAWTM's 40th anniversary. PANAAWTM stands for the Pacific Asian and North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry. This project aims to preserve and amplify the narratives of five influential figures in Asian American feminist theologies who are co-founders of PANAAWTM and/or significant shapers of Asian American feminist theologies in various fields. Through their stories, as shared through intergenerational oral history dialogues, PANAAWTM seeks to enrich the understanding of Asian American feminist theological insights, thoughts, and their contributions to broader theological discourse and feminist practice. So thank you so much, Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock, for being here. I begin with the first question, which is, tell us the name given to you at birth, where you were born, and a little bit about your childhood.
Okay, I was born to a Japanese family with the last name of Nakashima. My mother was not married to my Puerto Rican father, who was with the American Army, Occupation Army in Japan. So I was born Rita Nakashima. My Puerto Rican father named me for the actress Rita Hayworth, who was a Latinx actress. So I got the name Rita that way. It's a funny name for a Japanese person because I was Rita-chan, Rita-chan. I mean, the RL is very confusing in Japanese. So it's very funny that I got the name Rita. My mother was a nurse in a U.S. Army hospital, which is how she met my father. He was sent to Korea when I was 6 months old and didn't write to her for 2 years. So we lived with my grandparents in Onojo near Fukuoka. It's a small town near Fukuoka on the train. And we lived with them while she went back to work and waited for my father to write. Most of this is stuff I've learned later because I was raised thinking that my stepfather was my birth father. So I only know this much later from Puerto Rican pieces and other things, and some papers she left for me. But what happened was he didn't write to her for 2 years, but she knew he was alive, that he hadn't been killed in Korea because she was writing to my grandparents in Puerto Rico. So I have baby pictures in these cute little dresses and things that were sent from my grandfather's store in Dorado, Puerto Rico. And they had Noritake china my mother had sent to them. So there was a lot of interaction with my Puerto Rican family and my mother for a while. And then she evidently wanted to go there. And my grandfather, who I suspect was a Buddhist priest, I don't have confirmation of that, but he had changed his name as an adult to Jose from a different name, which Jose is enlightened one, and it's a Buddhist term. So, but he was in any way very involved with a Buddhist temple in town. He decided my birth father didn't have a good heart and wasn't reliable. And so my mother wanted to go to Puerto Rico to be with his parents, and he said no. So she worked in the hospital, met my stepfather, Roy Brock, and married him. Then when she was pregnant with my sister, I was about 3.5 at the time, or 3 years old at the time. When she was pregnant with my sister, the military, even though she was then allowed to marry my father or stepfather, because Truman had lifted the ban when he integrated the military, soldiers were then allowed to marry Japanese nationals. So my Puerto Rican father couldn't have married my mother, wouldn't have been allowed, but my stepfather did. And then when she was pregnant with her second child, he was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is now Fort Moore. And so she had both of her children alone in Japan. And then I suspect she could have gone with him as his wife, as this pregnant wife, but I couldn't because I was a Japanese national and not his legal daughter. So I think she had to decide either to go with him and leave me behind or stay with her two children. So she stayed in Japan. The next stage in this journey is I got sent to Okinawa. We went to Okinawa where my father was transferred. I think he requested transfer to Okinawa because I could legally go to Okinawa. And then we were there a year while he worked on trying to get me into the United States. That's another long story, but I did finally, at 6 years old, I learned English that year in Okinawa in an American military kindergarten. My mother stopped speaking any Japanese to me at that point. I lost my mother tongue when I was 5. And then we went to Fort Riley, Kansas when I was 6, and I was raised in the US military. So that meant 6 years in Fort Riley, Kansas, 3 years in Landstuhl, Germany, and then Barstow, California for the last 2 years of high school, which is the only time I ever attended a non-military school.
Thanks, Rita, for that. That's a lot to put on the
Yes.
table. So if we're staying with this childhood phase, knowing that
Yes.
you've discussed discrete markers, is it fair to say something like, was there a typical day for you? Or that's impossible to answer.
Well, I mean, I went to school. I got on a school bus and I went to school. And I grew up in a very integrated military. And because my father was not an officer, he was what's called a NCO, non-commissioned officer. He was eventually a sergeant. But um, I lived in the neighborhood of the NCOs. The officers lived in better housing somewhere else. And because of that, I grew up in an incredibly integrated neighborhood. So there were occasionally other half Japanese American kids that were also had Japanese mothers. There weren't a huge number of them in Fort Riley or Germany, but they were there. But there were also, my best friend in fourth grade was a black girl named Vicky, and then I had another friend named Belinda who was from, so she was San Antonio or something, but she was Latinx. So I grew up in a very rich multicultural environment, but I also experienced a fair amount of white racism and being called dirty Jap and things like that. So that was also stuff that baffled me. But my dad had to swear to raise me as a Christian in order to get me in the country. So we went to church on the base. And because it's a code of sort of ethics of chaplaincy that you don't proselytize. I went to chapel, but nobody ever asked me to make a confession of faith or anything. So my upbringing in Christianity for 11 months of the year was that kind of generic Protestant Christianity where you just went to church and stuff like that. There was this other form starting when I was in Fort Riley, Kansas. Every summer, my stepfather drove us to Amory, Mississippi. It's a northeast Mississippi town where his sister and brother-in-law had a cotton farm. And we spent the month of August there in Mississippi helping to pick cotton to help my uncle bring in his cotton crop. So I also had a month a year in the rural racist South. And there were black field hands, but they were, they were clearly a class different from my white family, even though my white family wasn't economically, I mean, they were just farmers. But they also got taken to revival services and Baptist, the kind of Southern Christian stuff. And it seemed really bizarre to me. I remember when I was about 10, I was in a evening service where we were told to close our eyes and pray, and then there was an altar call while we were praying, and so it was like you could go up there, nobody would see you, and I was never going to make a spectacle of myself and get saved, but we didn't have, we just raised our hand with our eyes closed. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get saved, I guess I could do it right. That's what I'm thinking with my eyes closed as like about a 10-year-old. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe I could just raise my hand and that would be it. But I definitely wasn't going to walk forward. And I remember thinking it through as this man was droning on and on, Lord, one more, Lord, one more. And I thought, no, I don't think I'm that bad. So I made a decision at 10 that I didn't want to be saved because it would be to admit that I was so bad that I deserve what happened to Jesus. That didn't make any sense to me. And I was in a struggle with my stepfather about the ways he thought he should discipline children. So I was very resistant to that kind of harsh punishment idea because I wasn't treated that way in Japan for 6 years. So I never got saved, and that kind of Christianity, it sort of gave me the creeps. I have a sort of reaction to it even now, that kind of piety. So that I'm a worm kind of piety. So
If I
that's my
could,
childhood experience of Christianity. So yeah,
thank you. Yeah, if I could follow up with that.
yes.
So you, for reasons that you've explained, you were exposed and you attended the general
Hmm.
Protestant services.
Yep.
Um, you resisted the I am a sinner, save
Yeah.
me,
Yeah,
that
you're
type
a
of thing.
worm. You got to repent of how terrible you are and turn to Jesus because he's your only hope. That just never worked for me.
Did young Rita have a sense, though, that I'm a Christian, or was
No,
identity, so the identity thing?
I don't think that well, I had great Sunday school teachers in the military. So by the time I was 12, I had read the Bible cover to cover because I was advised to do so. And and I concluded Jesus was just kind of another white person who was kind of rude to people. I mean, if you're an Asian, there's kind it was like, I don't think so. So like having him in my heart didn't seem like it was a great idea. So, or that kind of discourse just didn't really make much sense to me. It's a strange white man in this book that everybody said was really wonderful, but when you read the stories, he's kind of mean sometimes to people. Um, um, and so I uh, I was steeped in the Bible. I mean, I knew a lot about the story of Jesus and the books of the Bible, and I had good Sunday school teachers who taught. We did the letters of Paul in one Sunday school class. But one of my favorite Sunday school teachers was the wife of my eighth grade science teacher, who was just made me love science. I so the idea of creationism, all that just made that none of that made any sense to me, but that wasn't ever pushed on me as something I had to believe. And I found science fascinating. So when I hit high school, those last 2 years in Barstow, California, a really nice girl in my class her name was Joy Clark. We became really good friends. And so she invited me to her church where her dad was a Baptist, fundamentalist Baptist minister. And he knew I believed in evolution. He knew I had these sort of out there ideas, but because I was his daughter's best friend, I sort of got included into their family around the time my dad got sent to Vietnam. And so he did what a good minister does. He took me under his wing. I was invited to all kinds of stuff his family did. He also came and visited my mom. And he was just a good minister. His belief system aside, he was a really good minister. And so when I was 18, about to go off to college, I asked him to baptize me because I wanted to belong as a full member of his church, not as a visitor. And it felt like that was how I would also be fully in his family. So he did baptize me, even though I believed in evolution um, I did say, yes, I believe that Jesus Christ is my personal Lord and Savior, whatever that was supposed to mean. I knew I had to say that. So I did, but I didn't have to go. I didn't ever, I actually made an appointment to see him at his office to ask him to baptize me because I was not willing to walk forward in that kind of weird way and make a spectacle of myself.
So,
That, yes.
yes, that's so many follow-up questions with that. I want to
But
connect
that's how I
some,
got connect. That's how
yes.
I became a baptized Christian. That's how
Mhm.
I already knew quite a lot about stuff from Sunday school, and I didn't agree with the literal truth of the Bible or any of those kinds of things that the fundamentalist church preached. But the Baptist minister was also not super like ideological about his faith. I would say he just was a loving person, and he was just a great guy. And he was my friend till he died, even after I became a feminist theologian.
So before we get to
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
I want to return to some points connecting some of the dots.
Hmm.
So you've already
Sure.
shared that you lost your mother tongue at age 5, right? When
Yeah,
you
five
moved
to six
over,
that
5 to
year. Yeah.
6.
My
Okay.
mom just stopped speaking Japanese to me.
Okay.
Yep.
And you've shared that this picture, this, white Christian evangelical picture of Jesus, who Jesus was,
Yeah.
offended your Asian sensibilities.
Yes.
And you've shared that you were the target of pretty extreme racism, even as you lived in racially integrated spaces. So I'm curious about this. We're still with
Well,
the
I let
young
me say, I
Rita.
also saw racism against Black people in Mississippi.
Yes, yes,
So it
that's right.
wasn't just my experience being called dirty Jap and somebody poking me with a pencil in the back I had once. That was the only violence I ever experienced. But I did get called names, and I had to be careful about the friends I picked. I really got good at reading people, I think, from that experience. But I also witnessed, and because I was in seventh grade, I lived there the whole year when my dad went to Germany ahead of us. I was the only non-white person at my junior high.
Where I'm going with this before we
Yes.
get to Asian American feminist theology, we're still in the young Rita,
Mm-hmm.
young 5'6", teenager,
Yep.
18.
Yeah.
Did you have the consciousness that you were developing as a certain kind of Christian, an Asian
No,
American one?
no, no. I was really good at math and science. When I took the SATs, I scored in the 99th percentile in math and science. I only scored in the 95th percentile in verbal. And so the state of California gave me a full tuition scholarship to anywhere I wanted to go in the state. So I could go to a private school. So I went to Chapman University. That's another long story why I picked Chapman, but I was a pre-med major and I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. So I didn't have any kind of humanities interest in those kinds of questions about identity or whatever. I was really interested in biology, especially. And as soon as I went off to college, I visited a church near the college that was Baptist once, and it was nothing like the Baptist church, the minister that baptized me in. It was like I just found it was all white for one thing, but and it was in Orange County, and it was very strange. And so I never went to church again. I just stopped at that point. The only time I attended church was when I went home to and then went to the Baptist church where the minister was. And the more I off at the old, more time years I was in college, the less I wanted to do that. It wasn't particularly spiritually satisfying.
So then let's transition now
Yes,
to college age Rita, who's
yes,
very, very proficient at math, wants to be a neuroscience major.
yeah,
But we all know that you end up later on becoming the first Asian American woman to receive her PhD in
yeah,
religion or theology. So can you
yeah,
share us the story of how you went from your interest in math in
yeah,
college to this path to religion/theology?
yeah. My roommate in college, I didn't know anybody and she didn't, so we wound up together. It was a white woman from Salt Lake City who was not a Mormon and didn't like the Mormons. If you're from Salt Lake City and you're not a Mormon, you don't like them. I mean, there's this tension around the Mormons. And she was a political science major. Um, and 2 months after I arrived, this is like, I'm the first person in my family on both sides to go to college, I think. And it was like, and thank God for the Baptist minister. He'd been to college, so he was really a good sort of support for me in my first year, adjusting to being away from home and everything. 2 months after I arrived on campus, this rumor or this news spread through the students that the Santa Ana Minutemen had called the president's office and said they were going to assassinate all the Black students if they weren't expelled immediately. And I don't know how the students got word of this. It was to president's office. My guess is that the chaplain on campus, who was a sort of activist type and beloved by the students, also was an advisor to the president, and he found out and told the students. So there was a mass meeting that night. As soon as this news hit, there was a mass meeting on campus in the biggest space that I think it was a theater space, but there were so many students. I think probably 90% of the student body showed up. I had to listen from the hallway because I couldn't even get into the room. And it was a conversation about what the students were going to do to resist this threat. And the Black students were clear they weren't going to give up their college education, and the other students were like, we're going to help you, protect. And so the thing that most surprised me in that meeting was the Black students did not want the police called. So that was that was a puzzle to me for years, and it was sort of something in the back of my mind I hadn't thought about too often until the stuff about the police killing the Blacks. But that was like, the guy in New York whose name just fell out of my brain, the guy who was just selling individual cigarettes, and they killed him yeah. So that was when I went, oh, that's why they didn't want the police called. But because they didn't want the police called and it was their lives, everybody said, well, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We can't have people expelled. And they were like, we're not leaving. So somebody said, well, why don't we make sure that wherever they go off campus, that there's a ring of white students around them, so they have to shoot the white students first. And that everybody jumped on that one. So for I don't know, a month or so, it was a while. People would gather at the dorms, because there was a 2-block distance to the campus from the dorms, and clumps of students would form. And then they would sort of scooch down and walk down to the campus in these clusters of students of different colors, mostly white. I remember at the time I was wondering whether I should stand inside or outside. That I didn't know what to do with that. So there's your first moment of where does, if you're an Asian, where do you belong in this black-white dichotomy? And after about a month, nothing much happened. Nobody saw any cars with guns or nothing. So the clumping sort of dissipated. But what happened was, while we were doing these groups for a month, the white students heard about how in the city of Orange, Black students couldn't get served. And we were next to this, where Chapman is right next to the town of Orange. We were a major source of business for that town, especially on Sunday nights when the dining hall was closed. So there was shock, sort of. And so then the students decided to form an organization. I think it was called Students United, and it was completely interfaith. The leadership included Asian, Black, and white. I don't remember anybody Latinx, but it was Asian, Black, and white. And that was while yellow power was just emerging in Southern California as the thing. So there was a political consciousness with the Asian Americans on campus around the internment camps and stuff like that. So there was that. And then one of the Black students was related to Mahalia Jackson. And the Black students at Chapman were not that sort of Southern Christian stuff. They were more Black Panther oriented. So the civil rights movement on campus was led by Black Panthers, but Yellow Power Asians and then white allies. And they decided that they would go into the town with stopwatches and have a black and a white student, two black students and two white students, and time how long it took to get served. And in a couple of months, they had plenty of data to show that clearly there was a lot of racism in the town. There were some stores where black people couldn't get served at all. So they went to the Chamber of Commerce with the data and said, we're going to boycott, we're going to call a college-wide boycott on this town if you don't fix this. So they
Rita,
yes.
apologies for the interruption. Can you
Yeah.
remind us of the dates you were in college?
This was 1968,
Okay.
my freshman year. I graduated from high school in 1968, the year that MLK was assassinated, all of that.
Yes.
And but in the military is a lot. There's politics there, but there's also like you're not supposed to take sides because you have to serve the president in power and stuff like that. And the military had been integrated by Truman in 1952, I think it was. So I was growing up in an integrated military. But nobody was talking about racism and Martin Luther King or any of that sort of thing. I barely knew who King was when he was assassinated, but I sure found out that year who he was. But also who I think we might have even had United Farm Workers involved. I mean, it was just a crazy civil rights movement because it wasn't like the one in the South. It was multiracial. And in fact, the vice president was a Japanese American whose family had been in San Pedro as fishermen, and they were interned and stuff. So he was very political. He was kind of like my hero because he was a junior and he was vice president of the school and student body. So that's the year I became an activist overnight. And because it was a life or death issue. I saw the importance. And then when we started integrating the town of Orange, I saw what you could do if you were calculating and strategic about it. And then that led into, there was also anti-Vietnam activity by starting around the same year, because that's when Walter Cronkite did his editorial against the war. So 68 was just a pivotal historical year for the country. And I just happened to go to college in the middle of all of that and get involved in this stuff. And I swear my science classes were so boring by comparison.
So to
I was
return, yes.
like flunking out. I had a California State scholarship for free tuition for 4 years anywhere, as long as I maintained a C+ average. That's all I had to do. And I actually, at the end of my freshman year, was like a 1/10 of a point below a C+. I had just missed it because I had just barely worked in my science classes. And I didn't know this for a whole long time. I went back for a convocation to speak, and one of the very elderly women who'd been a secretary at the school came up to me and she said, I remember you because Emory Owen, who was a disciples minister, was a registrar for the school. He was a really sweet guy. She said, "Oh, Mr. Owen, he wrote a letter to the California State Scholar Commission on your behalf because you'd missed the grade point, and he told them that he thought you had promise and that they really needed to renew your scholarship, because I got a letter knowing I thought my career in college was over, and I got a letter renewing my scholarship, and I thought, oh, they didn't count the numbers right." I just thought I squeaked through because they weren't paying attention to the 10th or 100th of a point or something. So the kindness of strangers. I mean, I had no idea that's how my whole life career was saved, by a kind man who believed in me.
So to recap, as you've shared, you were literally facing life or death questions, not just you, but your
Real life or
classmates.
death. Yeah.
Yeah, including
threats.
especially your Black classmates.
Yeah, my Black friends. I was like,
Yeah.
why? Right? So we were so upset.
And then that led to disinterest in science. Now, can
Yes.
you share? Okay, so it's one thing to lose interest in
Yeah.
science, it's another thing to pivot.
This is a weird thing.
Okay.
Okay. I couldn't figure out how I was going to get through college because I was so bored with my science classes. So I asked the student leaders, like the seniors that I admired, if what I should take, was there anything interesting? And the weird thing was none of them was a religion major. They were mostly political science or sociology or that kind of thing. They all said to me, take Willis Fisher's Old Testament class. It'll be the hardest and best class you take in college. And I'm like, why the hell a Bible class? But they told me to. So my first semester, my sophomore year, I signed up for literature of Old Testament from a man who was 70. And he had been forced out at 65 to retire at Claremont because they had somebody they wanted to get rid of. So they instituted a mandatory retirement at 65. And the next year, Dr. Fisher got looped into that and he had to retire. But one of his former students hired him to teach Bible at Chapman because he wanted to keep teaching. So I had him when he was 70. I think he had Parkinson's because he had trouble talking. But I signed up. First day of class, I thought I'm never going to be able to understand him. His voice is all jerky, and 10 minutes into the class, I couldn't remember that he had a speech problem because he was such a fascinating lecturer. So that was maybe the only class in my entire career. I read every word of every assignment and did extra work because it was true. It was the hardest and best class I had in college. And what he did as the Old Testament professor was talk about how Jesus didn't say anything new. He was in the justice and mercy traditions of the prophets, that he believed in justice. So he fought, and he got killed by, he had a non-atonement theology before. And he did not go there, and he wasn't doing New Testament anyway. But he of course emphasized the prophetic traditions. That's at the core of the way Christians read the Bible. But he was very popular as a speaker at Jewish temples and synagogues in the area because he was not anti-Semitic in the way he talked about Jesus. And it was the first time Jesus made sense to me. Oh, right. He's like in this like long lineage of people who cared about other people and about justice and about God is loving and merciful and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, that's what we're doing. So I suddenly saw myself in that lineage, a 3,000-year lineage. And that was just utterly amazing to me. I sort of had a people. So I wound up a religion major not because I was thinking about it. I just took every class Willis Fisher taught. And when I had taken everything he taught at the end of my sophomore year, I'd already taken everything he taught. I signed up for an independent study in biblical Hebrew just so I could keep studying with him. And that's when he called me into his office and asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't like my science classes. And he said, have you thought about majoring in religion? And I said, no. He said, well, you have enough classes, you could at least minor in it, but you're doing really well. So I switched to religion at his advice. And then he got me a scholarship for a master's degree. He talked me into graduate school. I had no idea what I was going to do with BA in religion, but I hadn't thought about graduate school. And he talked me into it.
Does he know the influence he's had over your career path? Okay.
He was my friend till he died. And in fact, I had moved to Minnesota in 1990 to this endowed chair I had here. He knew I had gotten an endowed chair. And he died that year. And I was here in Minnesota for a week or something, 2 weeks maybe, and he died. And I got an airplane and flew out for the funeral. And some of my friends from those years were there. We all loved him. He was just beloved. And in fact, in junior year, the religion department chair was sort of jealous of his popularity and decided not to re-up him. And he was going to leave. And so a group of us formed a committee and fought it and saved him for another year, saved his job for another year.
So
We all loved him. Yeah.
It's incredible
Yeah.
the world, whether it's the registrar who saved your college
And this
career
and this
or this
Claremont
teacher.
professor, which is the reason I went to Claremont.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
So that if I understand this, the narrative arc, this Jesus that you first encounter in a secular religious studies class, on the Bible, that actually, it doesn't just make religion, the study of religion, interesting to you, but it helps you understand your own activism, right?
yes,
Putting
a
yourself,
kind of life destiny. Like this is
yes.
what you have to do if you're a moral person. And there is a 3,000-year lineage of people that have been doing this, and you belong to them. And that really it just it clicked. It just suddenly clicked for me that that's a legacy I stood in. Um,
Okay,
and
so
the whole question about the divinity of Jesus, and none of that was really that interesting to me. It was really um, what it means to stand in a line of human beings that cared that much about the world and justice and stuff, that they would keep at it. Willis Fisher's favorite phrase was "keep on keeping on."
keep on
Um,
keeping on.
but on,
So religion
yep,
major and then a
yeah,
master's.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I went to Claremont after I already knew biblical Hebrew, and I had a lot of religion classes, church history, Bible, theology. So I tested out of everything that was intro. And I immediately plunged into biblical studies, but I didn't really take to the biblical studies first. They were nothing like Willis Fisher. So I wound up mostly in pastoral theology. I did take John Cobb's Intro to Theology, and everybody said, only take it from Cobb. Don't take it from anybody else. So I waited. But the first amazing course I had was on the advice of the religion majors ahead of me that had gone to Claremont, that were my friends in that movement, said to me, Paul Irwin's about to retire. You have to take his teaching ministry course. It's fabulous. It's hard to get into. Talk to him as a new student and ask him if you can be in before you have to register because there'll be a waiting list. And so I did that and I got into that course. And it was the course that defined how I taught my whole career as a professor.
can
He
you
had
unpack that for us? What was it?
he had a Columbia doctorate and he studied with John Dewey at Columbia. So he had a pretty good pedigree in pedagogical theories. So the class in the teaching ministry was not Sunday school. It was pedagogy. It was a course in pedagogical theory. And he had us read Montessori and Dewey and Freire, Paulo Freire, right? And there were other theorists, I forget them all. But every week we read a book. We read one theorist, one pedagogical theory a week. And on Tuesdays, we knew that we shouldn't go in the classroom, that we had to wait for him to open the door. And then he would open the door and he would have set the classroom up in the teaching mode of the pedagogy we had just read. And he would teach the pedagogy in the style of the pedagogy. So he would embody the pedagogy, not abstractly as a theory, but as a practice that you as a student were experiencing as a student. And then this following next Thursday for class, we would discuss the theory and how it felt and what was like and what we thought was good about it and what we thought were problematic things about it. And that's where I understood what Freire was doing. I mean, I felt it. And so my whole teaching style was oriented to what will help the students claim their own education,
Okay,
not teaching what I know.
if you don't
Right.
mind, I want to make sure we fill in the details. Okay, because
Yes.
getting a master's doesn't necessarily mean you'll continue for
No,
a
but I was not
PhD.
interested in being a minister. I was never interested
Mm.
in being a minister because I didn't want to represent something, a belief system that I somehow had to lead people through. I mean, that was just not how I understood being religious. But I did want to teach because I got hired my junior year in college. I actually got paid to teach junior high Sunday school at a local church, so I taught Bible, and I discovered I was really good at it. The junior high kids really liked me, and I wasn't teaching them Pablum Bible. I was teaching them Bible from what my college classes, and we had a great time. So I realized I liked to teach, and I realized that that was something I could do. And I'd had such a transformative experience with education in college. I wanted to do that for other people. I
Got it.
wanted that, right? That I radicalized a lot of students. Let's put it that way.
And
Yeah.
I can imagine, so now you're getting a master's, getting a PhD, and not only are you one of the few Asian American students, but you're one of the few women students. Um,
Oh, yeah. No, when I was in my master's program, it was not an MDiv. I didn't sign up for the MDiv program. I signed up at Claremont for the academic masters. It was called a Rel M, a religion masters. And so I didn't have to take the preaching and sort of the arts of ministry. I could just take the courses I wanted to take. And so I took that teaching ministry course as the first course I took in seminary, and I was just mesmerized by it. I took a couple of more classes like that in Christian education, but the person I most was influenced by, I think, was Frank Kemper in pastoral care. I took, I think, two courses with him and one from Klein Bell in group dynamics and counseling. So I actually wound up doing a lot of the kinds of things you do to be a chaplain. And when I came back to do my PhD, I was hired as assistant chaplain at Chapman College because I'd had those kind of courses. But I also took Cobb's theology course, and I think I took an ethics course too. I can't remember all the courses I took when I got done, but I wasn't preparing myself for ministry at all. Wasn't my interest. Even though I was under care of the Commission of Ministry and the Disciples. They put me under care when I was at Chapman because I was a religion major at the Disciple School. And I had mentors that became really good friends of mine out of that mentorship program. But and when I was in seminary, when I did that master's degree, a local church hired me as what they called a minister in training, and I got talked into taking that job to be their youth minister. I told the guy interviewing me, I said, I don't want to be a minister. He said, well, this will be a good experience. You might discover you like it. He said, but you don't have to. We just like to hire Chapman's best graduates to be our youth ministers when they're going off to Claremont. So I got hired to be a youth minister for 2 years. And I was clear at the end, I'd had a great experience with a really good church, and it was not my calling.
your calling was to be a teacher, as you said,
Yep.
of
Yep.
some sort.
Yep.
If we can walk up to, we're going to move on to first dissertation and then, the first
Yeah.
portion of your career. Um, if you could share with us, how did this is one of the questions that uh, grad students have to face. What the heck
Uh-huh.
am I going to write on? What am I passionate
Exactly.
about? What do I care about? I
Yeah.
happen to know something about the significance of your dissertation, but if you could share with us
Sure.
how you came to make those decisions.
Yeah. So I had a 2-year interlude between my master's and my doctoral, a 3-year interlude actually, where the person I was dating at the time graduated from Caltech when I got my master's. He got a PhD in immunogenetics and he got a postdoc in Switzerland. So I went with him and we did 2 years in Switzerland. And I was there first on a tourist visa, and then it was possible. This is so bizarre. It was possible for me in a foreign country to enroll in the local university just because I was interested and pay almost nothing and get a student visa. So I wound up getting a student visa. I did 3 semesters at the University of Basel in their graduate theology program, which was the founding discipline of that university in 1492.
Wow.
I signed a book for theology students, and the front of it said 1492. the founding of the University of Basel. I'm about 2/3 down in the book. And so I just decided to take classes because I'd lived in Germany for 3 years in junior high. I had to take German, and it was very rusty. So I did about 8 weeks in one of those immersion things where you can't speak any English and you can't use a dictionary. You just have to get it. And that made me able to understand the German in the lectures. And they don't in the European system, they don't do tests and things. You just sign up for lectures and you go to them and then you sign out. And after 3 or 4 years, you decide you want to graduate, you have to take a bunch of tests. And so I wasn't doing that. I was just there to take graduate courses. And so I studied with a Czech theologian named Jan Lochmann, who was a Bardian. I studied with Heinrich Ott, who was a Bultmannian. He knew John Cobb. So I was like, he was so thrilled that I knew John Cobb and I was in his class. There was a Martin Schmidt in Bible a lot of the the non-Swiss like to teach seminars in English to keep their English tuned up. So I was actually able to take several courses in English, which was great for me. But yeah, so I just took courses and brushed up my German to the point that I aced the German exam for the PhD. And then after those 2 years, the person who became my husband got a job at MD Anderson in Houston. And so I lived in Houston for a year and worked as a ward clerk to save some money up for tuition to go back to Claremont for a PhD. So I spent time working in a hospital and then applied to and got admitted to, and then the Disciple Seminary Foundation gave me a small scholarship also. And then I got a job working for the physical plant department at Claremont. I cleaned the library in the middle of the night.
Nice.
It was great. I always went to the new book section see that's how I discovered Phyllis Tribble and the God and the Rhetoric of Sexuality, just right there in the new book section. I just would just take them, check them out, and all the feminist books. I did, that was 3 years. There was a 3-year interlude there between my master's and my PhD. And then when I went back for the PhD, I was the only, Catherine Keller and I entered at the same time. We were the only women in the program in theology. There were Marjorie Hockey and Rosemary Ruther had also graduated from Claremont, but they weren't students when we were there. So at the time, it was me and Catherine Keller. I think when I was doing my master's, I don't recall there being another Asian American woman student. I don't even know if there were any other women of color. There probably were. Yeah, Claudia was there, Claudia Heibaugh. But that was when I was doing the PhD. I didn't think around, am I an only? That wasn't how I thought about the world. So I didn't really pay a lot of attention in that regard. But then when I got there for the doctorate, I had, between my graduating from college and going to the seminary for the master's, I became a feminist. So there was that. And then when I arrived for my PhD, I was pretty impatient with the absence of feminist materials. But I was warned that if I tried to do anything like a feminist dissertation, nobody would hire me, which was probably true at the time.
Let me put a pause there to go back to something, and then let's hear about
Yeah.
the feminist dissertation. You just dropped, I became a feminist at a discrete marker. Is there an incident? Is there a convalescence?
It was the summer between college and Claremont Graduate School when Ms. Magazine published its first issue as the New York Times Magazine insert. And I read that, and I read I think the Female Eunuch and a couple of other feminist books that summer, and my head exploded. It's like, yes, yes. And for Howard Kleinfeld's group dynamics and counseling class, you had to do a 6-week group that you organized from someplace, AA or in your community or your church if you were an intern or whatever. And so I was being a dorm mother at Laverne College. And so there were women on staff, and I organized a group of women on staff, plus a couple of spouses of students I knew at Claremont to create a feminist consciousness raising group. That was the big thing. Then the Red Stockings in New York had done consciousness raising. And all I had to do was organize a group and meet for 6 weeks. So I organized this feminist consciousness raising group that met in my little living room in my apartment in Laverne, where I was this dorm mother. And it was fabulous. It was all white women except me, but there were so many different experiences, and we met all year. I did my little 6 week report, but we met all year. And uh the things that a number of the women were married, and I I remember one of them saying, "I don't understand this, but I don't like sex anymore." It's and I remember two other women's mouths dropping and saying that you too. It was like things like that intimate. And one of the women was a mother of one of the other women. So we had a mother-daughter pair, and the mother was a pistol. She still had a great figure. She was like, I don't know, like Reba McEntire's style pistol. And I remember a story she told how she had a big hat on one day and she was walking by a construction site, and one of the guys, we were talking about women being harassed. She said, "Why?" And I walked by there and one of the guys whistled at me and she said, "I ripped off my hat with my gray hair and said, 'Thank you, honey. You just made my day.'" So she was not having it. It was just an amazing group because we're all like, "Oh, okay." I think her name was Sigrid. We're like, "Okay, Sigrid." Um, but she was who she was. And so there were all kinds of different kinds of women in that group. I didn't pick them because they were feminists. I just had to do something. And so, but it became a consciousness raising group. Everybody, I think, left that group different and positively so, because we connected around some of our own struggles and things. So that all happened my first year at Claremont. I mean, that was my first year at Claremont as I did that group. And I'd already read the Ms. Magazine issue, and I'd read I think it was Germaine Greer, which was about being an academic woman in the female eunuch book. She was Australian. I think I read the Kate Millett later, and Simone de Beauvoir even later than that. But
And
it was,
now,
yeah, it
sorry,
clicked. It made everything
it
click for me.
clicked. And then so
Yeah,
you enter your first year, but the
yeah.
only other woman student is Catherine Keller. And at this
In the
point,
PhD
in the
program.
PhD, okay,
Yeah. In
okay,
the other program, in my master's program, there weren't very many women, but there were a lot of spouses taking classes. So they
okay,
weren't necessarily degree program, but they allowed spouses to take classes.
okay.
So I wasn't always the only woman in my class.
And at this point, had Catherine Keller had her own
No, we didn't meet
feminist?
until I
Okay.
don't know. We didn't meet until the PhD program.
Okay, right. But when you're first year students together,
Yeah.
can you share your feminist sensibilities with this only other
Oh,
woman doctoral
yeah.
student?
We didn't really become friends for a couple of years, I think. She and I were in the program together. She had lived in Germany. I had just come back from Switzerland. I remember at the meeting of all the new students, this being pointed out, and we were sort of set in competition in terms of both of us doing German and which one had the best German and blah blah blah. And she clearly had the best German, but it was a little like that. And I was very politically feminist. She was Jungian feminist, and I had an allergy to Jung. I had studied psych. I had a psych minor in college, so I had studied Freud and Jung and some of this, and I had a distinct allergy to Carl Jung. I didn't like his work at all. So, and I had this the day like the first month I was in the PhD program, a group of feminists I'd known before had organized a group called Sister Circle, and they invited me to join them. And so I already had a friends in a group I was with that were at the seminary, not at the graduate school in the doctoral program, but they were mixed, they're all mixed up. So I was in Sister Circle for the whole time I was in grad school. They got me through my PhD program in a sane way. We met every 3 weeks and complained about everything happening to us. But that was a different group. That was mostly people like Charlotte Ellen, who was Howard Kleinbell's spouse. She changed her name to Charlotte Ellen in the group because she didn't want the Kleinbell name. She was in the group. And a woman named Nell Morton, who had taught the first feminist class in a seminary in the country at Drew, was retired at Pilgrim Place. And then there were people like, and then there was a doctoral student in English from the university, like CGU. So there were different, we weren't all in religion, but most of the women in the group were in the pastoral theology and counseling program at the school. And later on, a Japanese woman named Yoshie arrived, and she became a member of that group. We had a woman from France named Joëlle Bourla who spoke to trees. She was amazing. It was a very diverse group, but we met every 3 weeks for the whole 3 years I was in the doctoral program. And somewhere in there, Catherine asked me if maybe the second year we were in Claremont together, she asked me if I knew of a feminist group that she could be part of. So she became a part of Sister Circle, but it was well into my time there. And we met occasionally and talked and stuff. I think at one point, there was a seminary student. We started working at the Center for Process Studies, and one of the MDiv students was a runner. And so she and Catherine and I started running and decided to take a backpacking trip together. So I sort of slowly got to know Catherine that way, but the person I was closer to in graduate school was Rebecca Parker, because we were both interested in art and aesthetics, and John was her advisor and my advisor. He was also Catherine's advisor, but she and I spent a couple of summers at the Hartshorns helping Dorothy Hartshorn process Charles's archives. And so we spent a lot of time together over the summers.
So yes, thanks for that
Yeah.
detour to the feminist conscious raising group and, explanation of the support that you had, pre-PhD and during.
Yeah.
And you were about to share the story of, you've received this unofficial memo. You're not going to be employable if you write a feminist dissertation.
And I don't even remember who told me that. I don't think it was John Cobb. He wouldn't have done that. But somebody said to me, don't do a feminist dissertation, you'll be unemployable. So I was always interested from the time I took a world religions class at Chapman in my religion major. And then I sailed around the world my senior year in the second semester and visited the Sri Aurobindo ashram and meditated there for 3 days. And then also visited a lot of Buddhist places and Hindu and all of that. So I was interested in religions of the world. And so I decided, since my own background was Buddhist in Japan, that I would do a dissertation on interfaith dialogue, because my last course in seminary was with John Cobb, and it was the first time he ever taught the Christian interpretation of Buddhism course, which was about dialogue. And I had never heard a relationship to another religion from a Christian about dialogue instead of missions. And I was fascinated by that. So when I came back, I decided I would do an interfaith dialogue dissertation, and I was going to compare Dogen and Kierkegaard. That was what I was going to do. And I was working on I was taking all these graduate, like I took the philosophies of Hinduism, I took a Buddhist class. I mean, I was taking all that stuff, which qualified me to teach world religions as a college professor. So that wasn't wasted. But I took, John was gone. It was either the second semester or the second year of my doctoral program. He was on sabbatical and he was gone. So they had brought Bernard Loomer in from the American Baptist Seminary of the West in Northern California. He was retired, but they brought him in to teach John's classes because he had been the dean at the University of Chicago School when John had done his doctorate, and he was John's advisor. And I thought, this is cool. I can study with the advisor of my advisor. Um, and so I took his Christology. He was teaching Christology. So, oh, okay, I'll take Christology. And everything was very androcentric. He didn't use inclusive language. And I was getting angry and angry the whole semester. And so I wrote a paper that was a 25-page rant, feminist rant about all the androcentric theologies and about male savior saving women. And Mary Daly said, that's a stupid idea. I said, anyway. So I wrote this, and I couldn't write it right away. I was at the end of the semester, I was so confused about how I was going to even think about all these Christological ideas that I asked him for an extension, and he was really reluctant to give it to me. But he gave me 2 months. And then I turned the paper in. And by then, he was teaching the Advanced Process Studies seminar, of which I had signed up for. So he made an appointment early in that semester to meet me in the classroom 2 hours before it started. And I thought, oh no, he's going to bring me out for 2 hours. This is really awful. So I went to see him, and he sat me down, and he had the paper in front of him, and I could see he'd marked the first page, and he kept flipping through the pages, and he had written all these things in there. And he walked me through the paper page by page. And he said to me, this is really an interesting thought you had here. And then he said, but you contradicted here. And then he just went like that. He said, this is a really well developed paragraph. It was the most elaborate evaluation of a piece of writing I ever got from anyone, college or grad school. And the whole way through, as he's flipping through the pages and saying all these things, I'm thinking, I flunked the course. The course. He got all the way to the end, and he flipped it over to the last page, and it had an A at the end. And that's all I could see. I was like, what? So he flipped all the pages back, and he said, he said, you need to write a dissertation on this. And I said, why? And he said, because you're saying important things. They haven't been said before. So I said, but I've been told if I write a feminist dissertation, I won't get a job. He said, it doesn't matter. He actually said to me, it doesn't matter. The energy you have here will get you through. If you do, he said, what are you doing? I said, interfaith dialogue, because my family's Buddhist. He said, you have to do this because you have the emotional energy for it. If you do the other, you won't finish. He said, you have to do this. He said, it's the first time anyone had accepted that anger was a good thing. He said, you have enough emotional energy in this to finish it, and you are saying things no one has said before, and they need to be said. Took me a year to change.
If I can make a comment and then ask a follow-up. So,
yes.
I find it interesting that this is now in both the case of your Hebrew Bible professor in college who sought you out.
Was 70 years old.
Yes. But actually the way you've presented it, he had a softer approach. Have you thought of majoring in religion?
Yeah, no,
right?
He was very sweet. No, Bernie Lewin, he wasn't confrontational. He was direct and firm. And he was great seminar leader because, you have bullshitters that want to show off for the professor. And anytime in that advanced process study seminar, anybody did that, he would know enough to just say, well, ask a few questions and reveal they didn't know what they were talking about. The bullshitting stopped the first week of that seminar. And we had real conversations. He was not interested in performance. He was interested in probing ideas and pushing as far as you can with something that you think is important.
So Loomer sees something in you. He sees the passion. He sees the potential.
Sees the critique of He got that I was making a serious critique of the androcentric interpretation of salvation that's in Christianity. Yeah.
And you've shared that. So how did you receive that? Did you need further convincing or
Oh,
were
it
you?
took me a year to decide to change because
Oh,
I
got it.
couldn't,
Okay.
right? Because
Mhm.
I'd taken all my coursework in the other stuff. And
Mhm.
then at the end of the second year with him, I was going to have to retool and take, like take tests and Christology, all my qualifying exams. I would have to figure out how I was going to do that. And when my coursework was really not going there exactly. And so, and I kept thinking, how am I going to get a job if I write a feminist Christology? What finally persuaded me that I needed to do it, besides his endorsement of it, was how was I going to do Buddhist Christian interfaith dialogue if I wasn't sure I was a Christian anymore? And that was a problem. All of us doing feminist theology in that era, we were struggling with Mary Daly's critique because she was right on, and we knew it. So what do you do with this male savior? What do you do with this? And so I realized I had to solve that for myself before I could keep going. And that's when I realized he was right. And then I realized also, and this has just been something I've it's not especially a conscious principle. I think it's an inner emotional impulse in me that a critique is not enough. You have to have a positive alternative. Um, I'm not into that kind of condemnation of bad things and then you just leave. I mean, I thought if I don't have a Christology I can write about, there's no point in doing one. And so I struggled with that also because I believe Mary Daly was right. A male savior can't save women, right? Uh, and and it really, the answer sort of came to me in a dream one night. That it, because it's too individualistic, unilateral to think like it's the spirit in everything. It's not in one. I really was drifting toward incarnational Eastern Orthodox theology in that process. I didn't know that's what it was. That's where my mind went with it.
So Loomer
Um,
saw you needed to do this, and it took a
yes.
year for you to come to that conclusion for the reasons you named.
Yeah.
How about your feminist support group? Were they like, yeah, Rita, you need to do this? Or were they also thinking through, are they going to go out
It
on a
was not an
limb?
intellectual group. It was really a spiritual care group. But I did have this horrible church history visiting professor who, when I did a feminist critique of something, I did a book, lazy professors assign students book reports, right? So he assigned this group of 6 in a seminar on Christology book reports, and we read various ones, and I picked Moltmann, Crucified God. And I thought there was some interesting things about it. I read other reviews of it, and then I realized that there were other issues that were feminist problems with it. And so the first part I did was just to summarize the argument and say what I thought of it. And then I did the feminist critique, and he gave me I was the only one in that assignment that made an A on it. Everybody else got a B plus. I made an A. And but then he attached a 3-page rant against how I couldn't think straight because I was a feminist. I mean, it was awful. It was a very hostile rant. And it was weird because I got an A on the assignment, right? But the feminist critique was what set him off. So our group had learned to hex from the Susan B. Anthony Coven in Los Angeles. They came out one time and taught us how to hex. And we did it every year at Halloween, Hallowmass. And I hexed him that year. And it was the same year we hexed Ronald Reagan and the Pope, and both the Pope and Ronald Reagan got shot. And the professor I had never got a tenure job.
Cause and effect.
That the group, I didn't have to explain to the group why he was a problem. It was like we had our list of people we were going to hex, and we hexed him.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Okay. All right. So
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's something really cathartic
Yes.
about
Yes.
you don't have to take this personally and carry it. We're just gonna hex
Mhm.
the guy and you can move on. I mean, that was really a lot of what that group was. We came in every 3 weeks and dumped stuff. And we
Okay.
have ways of dealing with dump stuff. And I remember one woman got fired from her pastoral counseling job because she had a boss who was really afraid of her because she was a feminist. And she was really devastated. And Joelle, the one who talked to trees,
Mhm.
said, I know what to do. And we laid her on the ground, on the floor. We met in her apartment usually, and we laid her on the floor. And Joelle said, this is a Tibetan ritual. She said, we're all going to lay hands on her and we're going to hum. And on the word pot, we're going to stand up and turn. Pot, I guess, means away. We're going to stand up and turn and throw the bad, evil energy from her away. And so we did that 3 times with it, and she felt better. And after that, she wasn't depressed.
Hmm.
And so we did things like that. We didn't have intellectual conversations.
Gotcha. No,
We
thank you for the
were,
clarification.
yeah,
Okay, got it.
yeah.
Okay.
I had other people that I could talk ideas with, who were a group that Bernadette Bruton and Jane Douglas and others had formed, and we shared papers with each other. And in fact, partway through the time in the doctoral program with that group, we wanted to have a conference because we thought our papers should be like out there. And we were like, but nobody's going to come because nobody's ever heard of us. So we need to find a keynote speaker who's famous that everybody will come to the conference and then we'll get to do our papers. And Nell Morton, who was in not that intellectual group, but the other group, was friends with Mary Daly. And so we decided that maybe we could get her. So Nell gave me Mary Daly's phone number because I had been getting a tutorial from Nell every week from the time I arrived at Claremont till I left. She was my real intellectual mentor because she knew everybody and they always sent her their books when they published them and then she would give them to me to read. So as a feminist conversation partner, this retired person at Pilgrim Place was my person. And that was Nell Morton. So she gave me Mary Day's phone number and I called her. I just called her out of the blue and said, we want to have a come and we'll pay you and everything. And she said, well, I'm on sabbatical. I'm not taking any, I'm just resting. I'm going to be on sabbatical. And I said, oh, well, I think you really should come because I know you'd like this and you'd have a really great experience with us. I said that to her. So she agreed to come. And I said, and Nell Morton recommended you to me. And Nell wouldn't do that. And she said, okay. So she agreed to come. And so we got money from the graduate school. I called all the local feminist businesses. They put in money for ads in the program book. And we actually pulled off paying her expenses and paying her an honorarium. And we got to give our papers. And the night we charged admission to her lecture and filled the hall at Harvey Mudd or wherever it was we had it.
Mhm.
She was that famous. And Jane Douglas hosted the thing for us that night, which was a bad match for Mary Daly. Jane is so gracious and Mary's not. But anyway, yeah. So all of that was happening while I was doing the doctoral program. And that was Catherine Keller was in that group. That's how and she was I left and got a job the year that was going to happen. So Catherine had to take over for me and run the thing.
Okay, so
So
no, thank
yeah,
you. That's fantastic.
I
So
forgot all about that. I had so many adventures.
right.
I have
Yeah.
to tell you, one of the most fascinating conferences I ever attended in my life was at the Blaisdell Center, where they organized a conference called What is Sanity, East and West? And they had metaphysical people talking about Hinduism and Christianity in the West. But it was fascinating because there were 2 psychiatrists, one at Harvard Medical School and one at Menninger, who are using Buddhist Burmese practices in their therapy work. And I think the trauma work I've been involved with ever since came out of that conference where the Western model wasn't the only way to think about sanity.
So let's
Okay.
move this chronology along. There's so
Yes,
much to talk about.
I
All right.
know.
So you now have your PhD.
Yes. And I did
you
find a Christology that I could say I'm a
Yes,
Christian. Yes.
exactly. And then you've shared that you've gotten a job actually even before you graduated. And at
Yeah.
this point, you've had many jobs and you've worked in and out of academe.
Right.
And this dissertation becomes the groundwork for your first book, but
Right.
you've also written so many others, right? So I'm going to
But I've
ask,
never written a single authored book since.
oh, so tell me
My
more about that.
dissertation was published under my name as Journeys by Heart, and it's my book. Um, but the next book I wrote was with Susan Thistlethwaite. That was Casting Stones on Prostitution. That happened because she didn't feel as a white woman she should be writing about Asia. And somehow she thought if I were on the project, it wouldn't be a colonial project, even though I am an American. But anyway, we tried not to be colonialists in writing about Asian women. But I've just all I I believe the work is better when it's not just me. And it's also a feminist principle. We're not individual geniuses. We depend on each other and learn from each other. And for me to model that by not necessarily doing single authored books, it is a working principle. I've also done a couple of essays. I did one with Nami Kim when she was a student at Harvard and I was at the Radcliffe Institute. Um, uh, I don't, for one thing, I don't like to write books that only 100 people can read anyway. I don't, it's not, I want books that will actually change people and sell. So even with Journeys by Heart, I told John, I said, I'm going to write it more like a book than a dissertation. Is that okay? He said, oh yeah, it'll be more readable. And then I had to edit it anyway because it was a dissertation. But I've been more interested in a wider audience, and so it hasn't mattered to me. I mean, I think if you're, you know, going after an academic career, single authored books mattered. And I never wanted that kind of a career. And so I've loved writing with other, I mean, I don't write with just anybody. It's people I know and trust and enjoy working with. And so I mean, I don't know. May not ever write another single author, but I write essays by myself a lot. So it's not, that's just to prove that I can. It's like, and people ask me, and so I do. But a book is such a major undertaking. It's a
So
lot of work.
yes. And so I
And
want to
yes, having somebody to talk about it, to work on, it's just so much more fun.
So I want to connect some of these dots. So we've
Hmm.
established, or you've shared that you wanted a PhD
Yes,
because you wanted to teach.
yes.
That was the vocational goal. And then you've
Hmm.
just shared, but you purposely did not, beyond your dissertation, transformed into a book. You
Yeah,
did not take the solo authored monograph path for
no,
feminist reasons.
yes.
Um, and so am I hearing you say you wanted to teach, but you never had just your sights on the academy? And that
No.
would help explain how you've made decisions to move in and out of it.
Yeah, the under piece of this, which is also a part of that story while I was in graduate school, is the last summer I was in Claremont before I went to Switzerland. So at the end of my Rel M work, I was invited to join a group of adults that the National Conference of Christians and Jews recruited as counselors for a week-long summer program on human relations that the National Conference of Christians and Jews had created for the Los Angeles School District. And it was now pulling from Arizona and San Diego and other places. But this was a week, they'd done it after the Watts riots to create a way for high school kids to process racism and all kinds of isms. And it was called Social Studies, Human Relations. And I was invited to become a counselor and the Protestant chaplain, and also to be there as an Asian American staff counselor and a mixed race staff counselor. So it was my job that summer to lead a small group with a white, usually a white male, and then also lead a cabin of females, and also meet with mixed race and the Asian American kids. So that was an amazing experience. I came back from Switzerland and went back to the graduate program at Claremont, and they immediately said, "Hey, we're still here, come back." So I worked in that program starting in 1974 with a 3-year break. I worked 14 years every summer because it was the most amazing, rewarding program I was in. It had nothing to do with academics. And that is where I learned a lot about what it's like to be mixed race. And the rule was you had to have two parents of different races. If both your parents were mixed, you weren't. We said mixed parentage is how we called it because it's a particular issue. And I learned a lot about myself from counseling those kids. I also learned about different kinds of experiences. I also learned that it's generally it's the case that it's not the racial identity, it's the parent that's most loving they identify their race with. If they have one parent, it's a problem and the other parent's okay, it's the okay parent, it's the race they claim, which I thought was very interesting. But also I learned all about the politics of LA and race, and I brought the gender piece in 1974. I said, "Why aren't you doing sexism?" And they're like, "Oh, we never thought of it." I said, "You've got to do this." And then they did it so badly that summer, I didn't want to go back. And when they asked me to come back, it was a feminist friend that said, "You had such an impact in the last 3 years. We've changed a lot of stuff. You're going to like it a lot better." So I went back, and it was there. I just stayed on these issues around race and sexuality and homophobia, and all we folded all of that in. And the director of it became a gay man named Glenn, who became a really close friend of mine. He actually put it in his will when he died of AIDS that I should preach his memorial service. So, I mean, I had that kind of experience, completely not academic. And that's where I heard stories of things that parents do to children I never wanted to know. They came out in groups, the suffering, and that's where I kept hearing, "I know my parents love me. I must have done something bad that they would do this to me." And that's how the atonement theology started to sound to me. That's why I'm so anti-atonement theology, because people have to believe they're bad when they're hurting because somebody loved them, broke their arm, put them in the hospital. No, they had to go home after a week at camp facing into. We had a Korean girl who jumped off a wall, tried to kill herself at the camp. Turned out she was pregnant because her older brother was raping her.
God.
Her family had been in Korea, in the US a year. She barely spoke English. She didn't have any friends. She was angry because she was being abused, and she was trying to kill herself because she was pregnant. And she wouldn't tell us, but she told one of the campers that was a peer leader, and we got this story out of her, and she couldn't figure a way out of that except to kill herself, because if she was discovered to be pregnant, her parents would throw her out as a slut, as a bad girl, and she didn't know anybody, she had any friends. Or if she told him it was her brother, they'd call her a liar and throw her out because he's the darling son, he's the older brother. And so it just so happened we had a woman from her school who was the nurse at her school, who was on staff, who was also Asian. She was also Japanese American, Florence. And we figured out a plan that Florence, this was before parental consent laws, that Florence could take her to get an abortion and then keep birth control pills for her in the school office so that she could take the pill until she was 18 and graduated, and then she was an adult and she could do what she wanted. I mean, it was that dire, the kind of stuff we learned. So it was, we were saving lives. We were doing incredible work with these. I mean, in a group, I remember this Israel. Israel was in my group. He was 16. He'd been in juvenile detention for murder. He'd come out of juvenile detention. He was in my group. He was quiet and never said anything, but he didn't share at all. He'd just sit in the group quietly. He wasn't disruptive. The day we had a sharing at the town hall meeting on family, and all these issues came out, and one guy talked about how his brother was murdered and what it did to his mother, it was, and then you go to your small group to process because now everybody is feeling things around their family. We sat down, and I could tell Israel had been crying, but he didn't say anything, and everybody shared whatever they were doing, and I thought, I'm not going to end this group without giving Israel a chance to say something. He's never said anything all week. So I just looked at him and I said, Israel, it looks to me like you're upset. Is there anything you'd like to share? And he just said, if I were that guy's mother, I'd want to kill me. That's all he said. So the group ended, and as they were leaving, I walked up to him and I said, thank you for sharing. I hope you know that how you're feeling right now is okay. It's okay. And he just said, thank you. And he left. So that I was having those experiences every summer, which kept me grounded in real life stuff. And the academic stuff never seemed as important. It was feeding what I was doing, not the other way around. And this work, it was feeding my intellectual work. I mean, I remember sitting in an ethics class when the professor was lecturing on Reinhold Niebuhr's Moral Man and Immoral Society. And I have all of these kids and their parents in my brain. And I'm sitting there listening to that lecture about Niebuhr. And I thought, Niebuhr doesn't know jack shit about intimate relationships. This is a screwed up anthropology. That was my thought. And then that's when I realized, wow, he's wrong. I have something to say. So Journeys by Heart is through the voices of abused children. That's how I got there.
I'm just reflecting on this, at discrete moments of your life. I mean, like you said, life or death, whether it's the college scenario of
Yeah.
physically having to be a barrier, so you're a human
So people
shield,
don't get shot. Yeah.
right?
Right.
Or the stories that you just shared about 14
People wanting
years.
to kill themselves when they're 16 years old,
And
or
then
having to go home to violence that's unimaginable in my mind. Right. Yeah.
And we've yet to talk about your work on moral injury, but on a daily basis, you have
Yeah.
been helping people who have been unmade because of
Yeah.
what they've done or
What
what
they've
they've
had to
seen.
be, the moral quagmires they've had to live with. Yeah, yeah. Somebody asked me, it's like, what has been the defining thing in your, I said, the defining thing in my entire career is an obsession with suffering and all the forms it takes. Yeah,
And I'm
that's what
seeing
I would
that now.
say.
Yeah, I'm seeing
Yeah,
that now. I'm seeing that thread
yeah.
through. That's
Well, and
yeah.
when I was at Bright, I had the money to do the Soul Repair Center from Lilly, which was a great gift. Um, and I did a lot of teaching, but I was working with a psych professor and a local person who'd been a school principal and was a lobbyist for education in Austin, in Texas. And they both were helping me create a program that actually might work to help veterans overcome moral injury to recover from it. And we worked on it and worked on it, and then I showed it to a former base commander, and he knew our representative. We actually lobbied Congress to try to get VA to do it. And then but the head of the staff for the Senate said to us, the Tea Party's guys just got elected. They won't pass it. This is a bad Congress. Wait for a better Congress. Well, of course, it's only gotten worse and worse. But I was working on that as an actual program to implement, even though I didn't know who would implement it because Bride didn't have any liability insurance or anything. Well, I had a person from VO at Volunteers of America, John Sharon, who was their Veterans Affairs person, on our board for the Solar Repair Center. He said, we could implement it for you at VOA. We have veterans we work with. We could do this for you. So that's how I wound up moving over to VO because I wanted to actually try something, not just teach about it. Because the need was critical. I thought we had something that might work. And rather than just go with the plan we created, I partly for the purposes of funding and legitimacy, I asked Jonathan Shea to help us, the leading person in moral injury work, to put it together. And Kristen Leslie, the pastoral theologian, and several people, an 8-person team, actually fleshed it out and really did a great job. Did things we never thought of to do in our program. So, but yeah, I've just was grateful that I found some people interested in moral injury and who really wanted to implement it. And then when we did, it worked miracles for people.
So I
Yeah,
want to continue on this thread, not drop
yeah,
it, but I want to fold in the work of PANAAWTM.
right.
Um, we are interviewing you because you are one of the founding members, you're one of
Yeah,
the original members, you've seen the organization grow. Um, I'd love for you to share what are the various things you've done for PANAAWTM, just to
yeah,
have it on record. And
yeah.
then I'll ask some other follow-up.
I got in, I mean, I'm not sure exactly why Letty invited me to the East Coast, but I had been involved with the Pacific Asian Center for Theology and Strategy at PSR in Northern California as a Claremont person. There aren't that many of us, but Roy Sano, who was directing PACTS, pulled together a consultation of women in Asian American theology and ministry. And so there were about 20 of us, I think, in 1978, I think, when he did the first one of these. And his spouse, Kathy Sano, was in it, but so was Nancy Yamasaki, Katie Choi, Afri Joy. Um, I forget all, but we were all on West Coast. And it was a consultation to get us together and get to know each other. And Roy Sano did a paper on liberation theology from an Asian American perspective. And we all looked at you like, what? So we kind of just said thank you very much and went on and talked about other things. But Naomi Southard was one of those people. And she's a Hapa like me, half and half, and Japanese American, grew up in San Francisco, but we sort of bonded there. And we put one on at her house at one point, and then we did another one at the UCC church in Berkeley. So there were 3 of these. And I think they were one a year, or I can't remember, but they were, anyway, it was the first time I'd ever met any other Asian American women involved in stuff. And then so it was probably the early, just, within 2 years of this group on the East Coast in 1984 forming up as the Asian Women Theologians. And the next year, I think in 85, they actually had a consultation with papers at the Mercy Center in Connecticut. And Letty invited me out to that. And I think I was known through the AAR because none of the women in they were like more ministry people. They weren't, no one was working on a doctorate. I was the only one doing a PhD. And so they weren't in the AAR. I was the only one in the AAR. And so I got invited in 85, I think, which was the first year Sue Pack also attended it. So we might be with Pui Lan and the group that was there, the original group, the second year that when they actually formally had a kind of event. And I and it was really different from the West Coast group. It was all doctoral students, and they were all from Asia. That I was the only like Asian American identity wise, I think, in the group at the time. And so I thought their papers were fascinating. It was really interesting. I wasn't, I think at that point, thinking I was signing up for an organization. Exactly. But I was also the only woman of color at the time, and the first one, I think, to be on the steering committee of the Women in Religion section of the AAR. And Carol Christ, after that, I think the Mercy Center was in the fall, and then the proposals come out in the spring, right, for the AAR. Carol Christ, who was co-chairing Women in Religion, calls me and says, do you know any of these women? And she's like, Hyun Chung and Nantawan Lewis and Kwok Pui Lan. She just lists the people who gave papers. They had submitted a panel of papers for the AAR Women in Religion section. And so Carol says, do you know any of that? And I thought, yeah, I do. And they said, well, what do you think of them? And I said, oh, I think their work is really, really good. I think it would make a great panel for her. And she said, well, okay, we can accept it, but would you chair it so it isn't too Christian? Carol was into goddess things, right? So I said, absolutely, I'll do it. So their paper, then their thing was accepted, and I was appointed to chair the panel. So I wrote to them. This is before email. I wrote to them and I said, I'm going to chair your panel. You have this much time. This is how it will go, and feel free to critique white American feminism as much as you want. I basically said that in the note because I was really sort of irritated by what Carol had said. Like I was going to control the content of the panel. So it happened, and the room was packed. People like Elizabeth Fiorenza attended, Karen Brown, some of the most senior people in the academy were in the room for that panel of papers. And they were all they all got published in a special edition of the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion. And I wrote the introduction to the panel. But I remember Karen Brown, who was a anthropologist, sociologist at Drew, who studied Haitian voodoo. And this is a Methodist seminary. She is a feminist. Also, this is a room full of feminists. And I remember her and Elizabeth Fiorenza also saying something like this, sort of almost tearing up, saying about the panel. She said, thank you so much for this panel. She said, it's helping me see a way I can reclaim my own Christianity. Because they were the case that I think Pui Lan and several others made in their papers was that in the US, feminists are attracted to Buddhism because it's not Christianity, and Christianity is patriarchy. And so, yeah, it makes sense that something else that's not that would be appealing, and you can also kind of borrow it and build it the way you want it, right? And then she said, in Asia, Buddhism is patriarchy. It's Christianity that's the liberative force. And it's a feminist force. So that I think that's what the cultural shift in the way they were talking is like really blew the minds of the white feminists who all were angry about the patriarchy and Christianity. So that was a panel. And Naomi and I had also been running these things over on the West Coast. So we decided that Naomi was going to interview all those women who had been involved with that about their theological issues and interests. And so I think it was in the same issue of the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion that the PANAAWTM papers from the East Coast and Naomi's and my stuff all got published in the same issue. So there's always been this somewhat tension between the immigrant Asian Americans and the native born. And I count myself on the native born because I don't speak my own language anymore. And I think that's the main dividing thing, is that some of us English is the only language that we're fluent in. And for others, they're bilingual. And I think that, so I think that that's been sort of part of the way PANAAWTM has been, is that because the Western group sort of disappeared. And so I went over, Naomi attended some of the PANAAWTM things that were on the West Coast, but mostly it's been not a West Coast thing. And I've just been part of it. I was in Boston for 5 years, and in Minnesota 7 years. And that's where I found the doctoral students. That's where I found the intellectuals. And it's always been part of the PANAAWTM identity that we are writing stuff for Asian American women, and we want it to be used on campuses. So we've moved from campus to campus to introduce these ideas and campuses where there are students that would appreciate that kind of visibility and support. So it's been an interesting thing to see it evolve and grow. The last, meeting with 120 registrants was just astonishing to me. We started with 13 40 years ago. And 50 books. I mean, 50 books. So that's been really fun to see. And it didn't get told as part of the story at the conference, but because I think not many people know it, but Off the Menu was, of course, our first collection where we explicitly said we're going to do a PANAAWTM book, and we're going to do it because we finally had enough PhDs in the next generation to put a book together. And so we sort of picked the stars that we thought would make a good collection. And we did it because I was working at Radcliffe and I knew the Hunt sisters. Swanee Hunt was at the Kennedy School. Helen Hunt was a philanthropist in New York. And Helen had a thing called a sister fund thing. And I think I can't remember whether it was Helen or Swanee that were invited to be on the board of their foundation, but I decided not to do it. But Helen had a beloved board member, who was an Asian American woman in corporate work, who died. And they created a fund for her, a memorial fund. So many people loved her and wanted to do something. And so Helen approached me and said, we have this board member who died. She's Asian American. You have this. Do you know what way we could donate the money that would help Asian American women? And I said, well, we're looking for a way to do this book. So the sister fund funded the creation of Off the Menu because of the death of an Asian American woman on their board.
I did not know that.
It's a wonderful story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed us to have 2 meetings where all the people got together and we all talked to each other to try to make the book more coherent and work together. And we could even refer to each other internally and all of that. So it's a much better book than a lot of collections, I think, because we got that money to do a really good book. And I think there is a dedication to her in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't notice those kind of things that much if you don't know who it is. But yeah, that's how we got the money. That was our first big donation from a foundation, was Off the Menu.
So you've shared, the celebration recently that 40 years of annual conferences. You've shared 50 books, feminist, Asian, North American Asian feminist work spread out, disseminated. And then you've also shared that in the origin story, there was both a mixing of Asian American, Native, born in the USA Asians and the international folk. And you used the word tension. And so I want to ask you about that. How have you seen the tension play out across these 40 years?
I think it's I remember telling someone I always felt a little peripheral to PANAAWTM because it was more for immigrant women who come as graduate students or who are bi-located. And I think I was talking to somebody who was an immigrant. She said, "Oh, I think I've always felt a little peripheral." So I think that it's there, since there's no one defining identity involved, everybody's a little nervous about whether they really fit or not. And I think mostly when I've worked on creating a conference, I've done about 5 or 6 of them. I can't remember anymore. I've worked with like Gale A, who's Asian American, third generation, or Naomi Southard, who's also Asian. So I've worked most closely with them in forming things. But I also have worked with Pui Lan and others in the academy, and also on a Wabash grant to create a study guide, and so other things also. And I remember when Pui Lan started moving into the post-colonial stuff, she's now doing all the time. And she said, oh, the book she read that was really helpful was Imperial Leather. And I said, okay, I better read that book. So there's been that kind of back and forth intellectually. And there was a lot more of that when it was smaller. Right. Now I spend a lot of my time talking to as a mentor to students or young faculty, which is this is just fine, but it's different. And we
So,
used to do, and we still do this, but it used to be more central to PANAAWTM, having people present their doctoral proposals to us and giving them feedback and that kind of thing.
I want to ask you a final question
Yes.
about PANAAWTM and then move to questions about legacy.
Yeah.
So, knowing this history and being an active member throughout the decades, um, what do you think the next generation of leaders should be thinking about, especially, in this very strange, from my perspective, bizarro time we're living in?
Oh God, yeah. Oh, uh, um, I think Protestantism was destined to slowly dissipate. And I think we're seeing the last gasps of that this century.
Hmm.
And I think that has to do with several things. One is the loss of an ecclesiology in the West. The idea that salvation is an individual interior change of heart. The Abelardian atonement is that it's and that the church only confirms an interchange. The church has no role in it really. That whole Jesus Christ is my personal Lord and Savior is way too limited a concept of the world to make any sense. And so there's the Western ego that Protestantism props up, which is highly problematic for all kinds of reasons. Um, and so that's part of the dissipate. It's just like it's such a thin basis for something. Um, the second is as a reaction to what was happening around the Eucharist and Catholicism, Protestants just basically jettisoned ritual as superstition. And I think Tanya Luhrmann is right. Abstract things don't live unless they have rituals under them. And I, you know, I've been in a lot of different churches that are basically liberal and Protestant. And the ritual is so thin. The extreme emphasis on individual identity and people getting up and ad-libbing things, and it's a sort of random process every Sunday. I mean, I'm in a church now. It's really horrible. They rewrite the Lord's Prayer in some kind of like as if it were a theological explanation of the Lord's Prayer, which is a very tight poetic thing. And so you'll be in this mode of prayer, and you're kind of in that reflective, and then you have to look up at the screen and read these words instead of just recite the Lord's Prayer, which is the one thing all Christians can probably do by heart. There's nothing else because we don't do the Nicene Creed, but we all do the Lord's. And that they've just erased that connectedness through their own need to have you understand the Lord's Prayer theologically. It's really bizarre to me. And I get irritated every time that happens. But but what the veterans program we use is highly ritualized. And that's why it's works, I think, because a ritual, what Protestants don't understand is the point of ritual is to relativize your personal identity. And that's how you change. You relativize who you are, you engage with imagination in a larger thing, and you come out changed and you don't even know how it happened because you didn't have to do it yourself.
Rita, you're making me think differently about PANAAWTM's opening and closing ritual. This is like you know,
Yeah.
a, this always happens at annual conferences, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, Eastern Orthodoxy didn't go where the West goes. So they have a very high they have an elevated understanding of human nature. It's you're growing into divinity once you're baptized and all that. And they fill their churches with art. They believe in beauty and sensuality and those kinds of things. And they have very elaborate rituals. They also quite patriarchal and conservative, but I think that has to do with the politics of what happened between the East and the West for a very long time. But I'm not advocating that be the ritual. I just think that Protestantism is not wise about how human beings are trained into habits of life and behavior. And I remember during the liturgical renewal movement, which is like 40 or 50 years ago, when Protestants realized they needed to do better rituals, that they pretty much sent kids out of church. They had like a children's sermon and then they left. So of course people don't grow up with the rituals in their bones. They don't grow up missing it. They go off to college and they didn't actually sit in church.
Yeah.
And so they don't miss it. And so they have to be brought back somehow because they don't come back on their own. And so I just think it's all the desperate things that Protestants are trying to do right now to save themselves. Um, I I don't I'm not I don't think any of it's gonna be very, I mean, I think maybe some trace of Protestantism will survive, um but it's there were a number of things that in the 70s it turned against the military for one thing because of Vietnam. And it was the World War II vets that built the churches. They needed the church, right? And the churches didn't want vets in them in the 70s, and there were a lot more of them in the 70s. So they became anti-military and unfriendly if you were a veteran. And they never figured out the sexual revolution.
I feel like we could talk for hours just on this point, but in the interest of time, I want to ask two final questions.
Yeah.
So we've talked, we started from childhood, went
Yeah.
through grad school, then your career, in and outside of academia. We've discussed your role in PANAAWTM, and now we get to the question of legacy. So we've talked about books you've written, we've talked about experiences and relationships that have been super, super important and meaningful to you.
Yeah.
How would you like to be remembered by those who've had that you've made an impact on, like whether it's academic work or moral injury work or activist work or chaplaincy? I mean, so you've worn so many hats. But how would you like to be remembered?
That's an interesting question. I don't think there's going to be a Christian tradition to remember me. I don't think there are going to be descendants down the road that are going to care about my Protestant theology.
Saint Rita Nakashima Brock, right?
or that theology, whatever. But I do think I've focused a lot of my life on trying to figure out where suffering comes from and how you alleviate it. And Proverbs of Ashes was a book like that. Journeys by Heart was a book like, I mean, it uses the lens of abused children to read theology. And I think, and of course, the work I'm doing now with moral injury is that, and it's not sectarian or religious in a particular kind of way. It sort of feels to me like my legacy is the legacy of my Japanese Buddhist family. I think it's interesting that my grandfather was such a presence in the first 5 years of my life. And it was a 70-year-old professor and then a retired professor. I feel like my grandfather kept coming back to me to give me good advice along the way.
I love that. That's
Um,
fantastic.
yeah.
All right. Concluding question
Okay.
is there something that you want to add or questions that I should have asked, but we didn't get to in this interview?
I don't think so. I always get asked the family marriage question, but I just realized at some point in my life, I'm not made to be married. It's just not my calling in the world. Um, I thought when in my
Yeah.
early 30s, when I didn't have anybody I wanted to marry, I was divorced and didn't have anybody I wanted to marry, like what would I wanted to have a child. I want to have the physical experience of being pregnant. But then I talked to everybody I knew that had children who were single parents, and I thought, oh no, I'm not doing this. It would be, I couldn't travel for 5 years and devote half my salary all my life for childcare for 10, 12 years. And I just thought, no, there's lots of people who want to do it and would be really good parents. And I just don't want to. I said, I'm the first woman to get a PhD in this. I need to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I made a choice. And I asked Nell Morton once, because she was really my closest mentor in grad school, if she ever regrets, because of course she never married. I think that was because she was a lesbian, but that wasn't part of the conversation. I just said, do you ever regret not getting married and having children? And she said, oh, honey, no. She just said, oh, honey,
With that drawl and
no. With
everything.
that draw. She said, I think about the exciting life I'd have and what I would have given up. She said, oh, honey, no, not for a minute.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I feel.
I love that. I think we can end it there. So,
Oh, honey,
um,
no.
this concludes our April 4th, 2025 interview with Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock. I'm Grace Gao. Thank you so much for participating in this project.